And what we have called tradition has now been inherited trauma, is rooted in trauma. So when I say what happens in this house, stays in this house. Anybody know the history of that quote, where that comes from? It's rooted in slavery. When we go back to and think about how our family systems were conducted, we come from the continent of Africa. We, of course, by the transatlantic slave system, we get here. However, when we got on these plantations and they found out that a man and a woman were in some sort of marriage or some sort of relationship, they broke the family up. So in order for the family to stay together, you had to be silent. So what happens in this house had to stay in this house. Unfortunately, due to that tradition, those silent treatments and those silent discussions, those silent things in family keeps those secrets quiet. So everybody in here knows an uncle that you ain't supposed to sit on their lap. Everybody in here knows an auntie house you ain't supposed to go over or spend the night. Because everybody puts your feet under the table don't mean you need to share a meal with them. So those things that we have called traditions really rooted in trauma, and that trauma has created silence, and that silence has kept the trauma going. The last thing I would say is kids need to be seen and not. That's also rooted in trauma, because what do kids do all the time? Talk. And if something's going on in your house, what is your child going to do? Talk. So we have taught our children to keep their mouth shut. Good, bad, ugly, or indifferent. So the tradition is the kid can be in the space, but the child can't talk. And the problem with not talking is that things that happen in the house that are maladaptive, that are traumatic, that are not helpful, stays in the house, and that silence continues, and that's a tradition that is literally inherited trauma. There are so many things that are happening in our families today that we don't talk about them. Those cycles don't break, right? We don't break those cycles. We don't begin healing. We don't teach languages. We don't do those things. We don't do it at all. And that tradition stays. That is how inherited trauma happens. That's how it gets into our DNA. That's why it's called disease. It is dis-ease in the body. That's why disease is rampant within our communities, because we won't talk about it. It sits in our tissue. It has to be exercised out. And when we don't talk about that level of trauma, that inherited trauma, we sit in that dis-ease, and that dis-ease is what's destroying our families.
Thank you, Reverend. When I heard that, I really think about the book Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome.
Absolutely.
By Dr. Joy DeGruy, right?
Absolutely.
And so her research was in black men specifically that led to her publishing this book, but it really teetered at the point that everything that we call behavior that we know to be true is rooted in what the Reverend said, right? Slavery. And in that trauma, so how we walk, how we talk, how we behave in public, everything, right? So it's passed down traditions, but even the concept of I have to show up to work looking a certain type of way, right? I have to show up to my family looking a certain type of way. As a black man, all of it is rooted in trauma, right? In that it's less a tradition that they've given us and more so a subset of behaviors that we now call our own. And we then pass on and continue to pass on. So I really think about that book, I'll say it again, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy, and where we can look at all of us as a people and say, wow, every behavior, even kids who go into grocery stores, you can't have that automatically.
Don't touch.
Or sit still, right? Thinking about how many of our young black boys and girls are being diagnosed with ADHD because they can't sit still, little black kids, right? But in reality, they're not supposed to sit still, right? And the idea of sitting still is to be a good boy, a good girl, but for black people, it's to be a good slave. Because if you're not a good slave, you'll be beaten and killed. So parents, what they've done is strip their kids of their creativity and identity as children, right? So that they're not murdered when they leave the house. And these are the things that we all experience. When you go into everybody's had that talk, not the police talk. When we going in the store, you better not touch nothing. You can't have nothing. We got some at home, right? Even if you ain't have nothing at home. So even that minute behavior and idea is rooted in the idea that we're trying to keep our children safe. Mm-hmm. Because if they get to acting out in public, they might die.
I'm so glad you brought that book up because that what came to mind as brings to my next question. In the church, you know, people like to quote the scripture, obedience is better than sacrifice. Right? And I'm not saying it's not. But more, but they're saying that obedience is more than emotional safety. It brings us to our second question. What does honor thy mother and father mean when the people who raised you has wounded you?
I was actually just having a conversation with a brother, and I actually don't have a well thought out answer for this because as he and I sat across from each other in the office this week, and he told me a very beautiful story about how he has forgiven. This guy's about 36, 37, and how he's forgiven his father, but now his father is in like a rehab facility for his health, not so much like addiction, and that he hasn't went to go see his father, and that he is so deep in his faith and in the spirit, he's not understanding on why he hasn't went to go see him. And he talked about honor thy mother and thy father, though his father had abandoned him as a boy. And so we sat there and talked for about 20 minutes about that because even my own story, I can't tell you what that looks like it means for both me and both of my parents. Because the way I honor my mother looks completely different than how I honor my father. Because honoring my mother looks like respect, love, right? Self-worth as a person, taking care of her, caring about her. Honoring my father looks like not cussing him out, not being emotionally triggered by the sound of his voice, right? Not being upset that my child looks like me, therefore she looks like him, even though he has nothing to do with either one of us. So honoring him and honoring my mother look totally different. And I don't have a great answer for it. Maybe the good reverend does.
I don't, but I'm gonna waddle my way through this thing. I think the first thing when I saw this question, I am a theologian, so I have to look at the word honor, right? And what does honor mean in this particular text? So when we're talking about honor thy father and thy mother, that comes from what? Y'all gotta talk back to me in here. Thank you very much. That's my boo in the back. Honor thy father and thy mother is one of the 10 commandments. It's the pivotal commandment. It's commandment number 5. If you know anything about the 10 commandments, the Decalogue for any theologian in the room, it's 10 commandments. And the 5th commandment is the pivotal commandment because there are 4 or 5 on either side, right? 5 is where things change. Before 5 is how you honor God. After 5 is how you honor God's people. Walk with me. So if we are talking about honoring our father and our mother, that honor in the Hebrew means to be heavy, honored, glorified, and burdensome. So that lets me know that honor can either be positive or negative. Honor doesn't always have to be uplifting, glorified, etc., but honor can also be burdensome. Speaking to what you just talked about, how the difference between honor your mother and your father doesn't always have to be positive because everybody doesn't have an honorable relationship because they don't have honorable mothers and fathers. Because honoring, when it comes to the 10 commandments, is in the connection of God. You honor your parents like you honor God. And if your parents aren't honoring God, tell me what honor looks like. So that means that the honor that they give to God will mirror the honor that you give to them. I'm sorry. Is anybody else in the room with me? So that also means it needs to be mirrored. So if that's the case, then we have to say that honor in whatever context, in whatever space, has to be or has to feel different depending on how you approach honor. And what you just said talks about how honor needs to be different. I'm going to honor my mother different than I honor my father because they are 2 different people. They interact with me differently. They raised me differently. They respect me differently. They see me and have seen me differently. They have heard me differently. So therefore, my honor of them is going to be what? Different.
Equity.
So yes, if there's been some wounding here, there's going to be a difference and how I honor the person that has uplifted me, that has loved me, that has positively arranged and supported and shaped me, versus the one that has harmed me, that has not seen me, that has not loved me, that has not supported me, because the honor is not there. Because if you honor God according to the book, then you are going to honor me. And when there is dishonor, then what do I get? Dishonor. So that's how we deal with it. We gotta deal with the difference in that, period.
Amen.
This is what caused me to shout on Tuesday. I just want y'all to know this what it was. I don't know why she called me. Just give me a
I'm
free
like,
word.
I really did give a minute. That's true.
Listen,
That's true.
that's why I had to bring these two together. Listen, all right, so we talk about that dishonor or that unhealthy patterns that we kind of already spoke about at the beginning. How do we disrupt that or challenge that without being labeled the problem or being difficult, the one of the family? Because we just don't go along to get along.
I can answer that one. Two parts to that for me. Leave and cleave is one of them. My wife taught me that. And I say that because when you understand and realize that the habits that you were handed are harmful, it gives you an opportunity to do something different, right? So if the things my family, right before my wife and children, gave me harm my wife and children, then I have to have an introspective look at what I've been given, right? And put it down. Because one, it's not my weight to carry anymore, right? But I had to have conceptualized that, to know that, to put it down. Because my family is now having to carry the burdens that I was given. And it's not fair for my wife to have to carry what my father gave me. It's not right for my children to have to carry what my mother gave me. So that's first off, you leave and you cleave. And then the second part to that was I'm not too interested in how people see me if what I'm doing is for the betterment of me and mine. It's not my job and responsibility to bring them to salvation. It's my job to take me and those who God left me in control of or to oversee or to work with, right? So those that have come before me have had the opportunity. And what I can do is lead with the light. And if they don't want to follow suit, if they don't want to acknowledge their behaviors or anything like that, that is for them to figure out. But if it is being harmful to me to try to get them to where I've gotten to, nah, I can't do that because of the first point, all right? You gotta leave them where they at because now the ones that I have, they can't take that anchor. My wife didn't sign up for that anchor, right? We ascended. We can't be stuck where we were yesterday.
I say you ascending. I say you. The question asks unhealthy family patterns. What are patterns? Let's start with that, right? So patterns are habits that are formed in repetition, right? That's a pattern. So that already means that there was a pattern already there before we tried to even break it up. So let's deal with that. So we have to honor the fact that there was something already functioning or dysfunctioning that we are coming to disrupt. And if there is a dysfunctional family, anytime you are a cycle breaker, you're always going to be the one that's the problem because you are trying to disrupt the pattern. So we have to look and see what patterns are here, do what we need to redefine, right? So what do we try to break? Do we really know what the family culture is around love, around care, around respect? Those words are action. That means something. So what does your family culture say about that? And are you okay with that family culture? Are you all right with that? We got to address that. No, love doesn't look like my kids hugging everybody because my kids don't need to be around all them spirits. Come here, somebody. Just because they are a child and you tell them to go hug them, no, that's transference of energy. I don't need that energy on my baby. So no, my child's not going to hug or kiss on everybody. Be mad. You be all right. If that's the way that your family moves, then we need to talk about why that is okay or why it's not okay. It is okay. We're just breaking up and changing the pattern, right? We just need to do that. So we also, that's a micro level. We also have to address or talk about breaking up the major systems also. So there are systems that uphold those patterns and habits. Come here, church. Come here, church. What unhealthy family patterns do we also see that uphold that? So what are we teaching in our churches? What scriptures are we holding up? Who's in leadership? Who's teaching? Who's preaching? Because we know in church culture that also supports family culture. We can lean into Deuteronomy, where we talk about what family looks like. We preaching and teaching at the table. That's what the word says. So if that's the case, and what we preaching and teaching at the table also gets supported in this house. So we need to look at those systems. Look at the church system. Look at the school system. Look at our family systems. What does that look like? So you break it because we got to talk about it. I think the theme that we've both been talking about very clearly is about silence and how silence keeps those patterns going. So what we're talking about, we need you to run your mouth and start talking. We need to talk about what feels good, what don't feel good. We need to address it. We need to deal with it not only biblically, but also in the family structure, and also look at the systems that uphold those unhealthy family patterns, because we got them everywhere.
I'm trying to stay on track here.
You ain't got to.
So, so kind of going to that, because it's going to that church hurt thing, right? Where there's just a place, like you said, that upholds or to keep these patterns. And even in that space, if you begin to challenge or speak to those systems that you are seeing as negative, too difficult, how do we disrupt that even in the church? Because a lot of times church hurt happens because we're trying to honor family. We stay because that's been mama pastor, grandma pastor. Don't you mess up what we got going on here. I don't want you to challenge things. A lot of times where that church hurt is because we stayed in places because of family, because of loved ones, and that's not who we was called to. And because we stayed in a place too long, we had to get hurt to leave. And if you don't heal correctly, then you blame God and not your disobedience. So how do you disrupt that? Now, this ain't the original question, but it's the question in the question. So y'all know how I do.
I'm going to be out of pocket, but I don't care. The church needs a couch. Meaning the church needs to go to therapy for real, for real. We need to really do some serious deconstructing and looking at how the church structure, how patriarchy, sexism, patriarchy, sexism, imperialism, racism, co-opting of African spiritual practices that we don't want to talk is really hoodoo. We really need to just really sit in this space where we need to just talk about it and deal with it, right? Because it's already here. It's already here. It's been here. And so it goes back to silence. I keep saying silence because we need to talk about it. Like, we need to have preachers and teachers and therapists and theologians that's really going to break down the word for real. That's not about Christianese. That ain't about making sure the church has the number of zeros it needs, because it is a business. But we really need to think about for real, about how we deal with people and how we honor people, how we dishonored people. Like, we got to deal with it. Now, I'm old school Baptist, right? So I come from a church where you do something wrong and somebody's bringing you to the front of the church, right? You done got pregnant. You stand in front of the church to apologize. But who's in front of the church, though? The girl. Where's the boy? Nowhere to be found. So am I saying that that's right? No. Do we need to talk about it? Yes. But we also not talking about sex education in the church either. We're not talking about condoms. We're not talking about STDs. We're not talking about all those things. So it has to be an educational part where we really discuss those silent things that we say that we don't want to talk about that makes it encouragement. But the truth of the matter is, when we don't talk about it, it is encouraged. You will do it. So we have to talk about it. So break the silence. We really have to deconstruct the things that we have really been taught so that we really can deal with the churchers that is here. Some pastors were a go, and some pastors were sent. Some folks in the pulpit don't need to be. Some teachers and preachers just don't need to be. It's just true. And so we really have to look and see at leadership and how are we really looking at the people that we are leading, and who are standing in these churches so we could deal with the church hurt. Because in a lot of ways, leaders are bleeding onto the congregation, and our wounds are hurting other people.
You have anything to add?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think one of the things we have to do is demystify church hurt and call it what it is.
Yep.
Spiritual trauma,
Yep.
right? We have to demystify the label of church hurt because people hear church hurt and it's a joke. Oh, the church did this to you too.
That's not funny.
Right? And so it wasn't until a friend of mine talked to me about the idea of spiritual trauma and how he was in seminary school and had to drop out of seminary school because of spiritual trauma. And when he talked to people in the seminary school, they talked about it as if it was like church hurt and that he was the problem. And it was his disobedience somehow as a child growing up in the church with his father who was the pastor of the church, right? And so he had years and years and years. He spent his entire life in church and has had spiritual trauma, and we never talked about it as such. So I think coming to the couch, yes, but the diagnosis is not church hurt. The diagnosis on the treatment plan is spiritual trauma. And that is spiritual trauma from the entire church landscape, not just the person who experienced that and now has gone astray, as one would say, but the ministers, the deacons, the deaconess, everybody in the church has experienced a sense of spiritual trauma. But we have to unpack the bag before we can even understand that even the leaders of the church have been victimized by it. And it's again something that has been passed down and passed down and passed down. And to tell, again, the patriarchy that you are a part of the problem, but also say you have been subjected to the problem itself. You didn't create yourself. And talking about how the church didn't create itself. Someone set this up this way. And that we are all collectively healing. But if we don't approach it like that and make it seem like an individual's issue with the church, we'll never get anywhere. I think of a quote when the good reverend was talking, a child who is not embraced by the village will set it on fire to feel its warmth. So if someone says something in the church and they are not embraced when they say something, and then what happens? Because that has happened. Someone did say something. Someone said, oh, X, Y, and Z is bullying me, or such and such is sexually assaulted, and such, and people said something, they was ostracized out of the church. So the trauma wasn't even the instance of what happened, it was the response that the church gave them. They weren't embraced when they did say something, which sent them on this lifetime journey of trauma. And they blamed people, right? When it was a spirit about it the entire time.
We just don't. We need to use the words. I agree with you. It's really spiritual violence.
Ooh, yeah.
And we won't use the word violence because violence feels harsh. But the truth of the matter is, it is violent. We read a book that's violent. If you have not read the Bible, I don't know what's wrong with you. Like, we're gonna speak truth. The Bible is violent. Like, stop it. And so there's violent language in the book. Like, it's just truth. And so there is a violent tinge to how we treat each other in the church, but we won't talk about how we use the language of the Bible to produce that level of violence. We do. And so we just have to be honest about how we take the word, how we read the Bible, how we interpret the Bible, and unfortunately, we use that as a way to be violent towards other people. It's truth.
Before you move on, I think about the comedian Drewski.
Ah,
His
yes,
skit.
that skit, yep.
His skit. So Drewski, if you're not familiar, had a skit in which he was portraying a minister, and basically he stood in front of the church and said, with a Dior jacket, he had a Dior suit jacket on, and said, I need $10,000 from everybody in the church. Close the doors.
Shut the doors.
Lock the
Ushers,
doors.
shut the doors.
And he caught a lot of flack about this, but the people who did it, like this was he wasn't just, he was
Imitating.
Imitating.
Yes, he was.
Imitating a minister who had done this.
A few ministers did it.
And there was clips in the church community, the online pastors, the motivational preachers, as I would call them.
Come on.
They came for him.
Big time.
And made it seem like his concept of this skit was fiction instead of what it was nonfiction, right? It was a portrayal of what actually happened. And so the church came for him, right? And it's like, it could have been used as an opportunity from the church to talk about what had happened.
Correct.
Like, this happened to people. People were sitting in a church and the pastor said, shut the doors. In real life and in real time. And it didn't happen.
See, I got a lot to say, but I'm gonna leave it for that last question because I think we got something to go. I got something, but it's about accountability and forgiveness. So I'm gonna leave it for that last question. But I'm with you. I'm with you. Because I want to stay in this. Because what do it look like? What does it look like? Markers of a spiritual and emotional mature church. What do that look like? What are the markers of that? Of a spiritual and emotional mature church. You saying it ain't in? You looked at me like it ain't.
I'm going to take the back seat to the reverend. I'm going to keep doing that to the reverend.
It's education from the crib to the grave. So if you're looking at a church, you're looking to see if something is spiritually or emotionally mature, you're looking if they have education from the crib to the grave. So are the children being taken care of? And we go all the way to my seasoned saints. Won't he do it, right? If there is a way for the entire lifespan to be touched within the church, then you got some level of church is doing something. Because there is a lifespan of people, correct? Am I right? Like, come on, like we come in, we got an end date. So the lifespan of the lifespan of people should also be mimicked in the church. Pay attention to language. What language do they use? What version of the Bible do they use? Come here, somebody. All right. Okay. I'm gonna leave it at that. All right. What version of the Bible are they using? Hello, Pastor. What effigies do they have around? So our cross is shown. Does it look like a concert hall when you walk in the door? What picture of Jesus is up? Does he look like Brad Pitt with blonde hair and blue eyes, or does he look like the historical Jesus? Okay. I'm just telling the truth. Is there an integration of the spiritual, theological, and it's in really the entire lifespan? Like for me, when we talk about spiritually, emotionally mature churches, there should be language that supports that, right? So if I want to use a little bit of Christianese, we're talking about are they getting fed milk or meat, even though I really don't like that analogy, but I know where I am, right? So if we have that weight of language and how education is done, those for me are the things that I look for, the markers of a spiritually and emotionally mature church. Who's in leadership? I forgot about that part. If I'm only looking at men, we got a problem. If I only look at old men, we got a problem. If I only look at old women, we got a problem. It needs to be, again, the lifespan of the church. The lifespan of the people, I'm sorry.
You're looking at me. If I was to answer this question, I would take it out of the church and look at any organization.
T.
Right? The health of any organization, the spiritually, emotionally safety of any organization.
Mm-hmm.
And when you walk into an organization and the least of the people is the most tired, not the leader, because I was taught that the leader does most of the work. So if the leader is not the one leading, but the one managing people and processes, there's an issue.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I would think of it from that perspective, because I've been in both church and an organization where it wasn't spiritually or emotionally safe to exist in it. And that was from the bottom of the totem pole all the way up to the top.
Talk a little bit about safety and what that means.
What'd you say?
Talk a little bit about safety.
Safety. Oh man,
That's a deep question, I know.
Extensive opportunity to talk about emotionally safety,
Yeah.
specifically psychological safety.
Yeah.
But psychological safety looks like the ability to just be human, right? So what we're stripped of is the opportunity to fail.
Mm.
What we're stripped of is the opportunity to succeed in a different way than what somebody else told us to succeed as. Psychological safety looks like open communication. It looks like, thinking about my PowerPoint, 'cause I really do talk about this all the time. Psychological safety looks like open communication, the ability to fail, the ability to be okay with learning in public, not feel like you're going to be shamed from learning. Thinking about the church, I remember being popped in the mouth on the way to church by my granny, rest her soul, from wanting to learn. But the questions that I was asking, she did not like. So in this small microcosm of a situation, right, I no longer felt psychologically safe with my grandmother, who I felt safe with, period. But in this instance, talking about God, it was no longer a safe place to have that conversation.
It's interesting that she would strike violence in your inquisition
Yeah,
instead of potentially being honest about her own lack of knowledge. So that vulnerability piece
Yeah.
can also trigger those kind of responses, and that's about safety too,
It's
right?
about safety.
Where you're pushing on her safety, and do I feel comfortable asking that question myself, or you to ask that question?
Yeah.
And then here you go, and there's a violent response. That's interesting.
and what the response could have been when she asked that question.
Correct.
All right,
Correct.
so these traditions 3-4 questions ago, right?
Yeah,
Going all the way back.
Yeah.
What was the response when she asked that question?
Or if she could, she felt like she
Or
could.
if she felt like she could. Yeah.
Evolving and growing. Let's lean into that a little bit more. But the next question, what did you learn about power growing up? Because I think that goes a little into that. You know, who gets it, who doesn't, and what happens when you challenge.
From what perspective?
I'll say both church and family.
Okay, so the way I answered this question, I'll be honest, I did it from a church perspective, and my answer had to come in two. I had to do it before my childhood pastor and then after my childhood pastor, because those are two different power structures. And my best friend is in the room, and she's shaking her head, and she knows exactly what I'm talking about. During my childhood, probably till I was 13 or 14, power was shared. Power was talked about. I saw women in power. I saw women preaching. I saw what power looked like when it wasn't corrupt. I saw power given. I saw power shared. I saw power taught. I saw what it looked like to be educated in my own power as a black woman, as a black female. I was told how to do interviews. She taught us how to do interviews and fill out applications. Like, power was something that's attainable, accessible. After that particular pastor, things changed. Power was about who he was close to. Power was about who could get it and who he wanted to share it with. It wasn't universal anymore. It was something that could be used to harm. It was used to use individuals to get information from other individuals to tell him. So I learned a few different things, you know what I'm talking about, a few different things when it comes to power in the church. So it was really weird for me to be in that space afterwards and have to relearn it. And I had to find spaces where I had to unlearn what I was learning and then try to hold on to what I knew. And so there was a lot of things that kind of shaped and reshaped and reformed that. So I think a part of my education in my childhood, I became a rebel because I was raised one way and then I saw something else. And so my mouth got me in a lot of trouble growing up because I always, thank you, Shantae, my mouth got me in a lot of trouble because I was always the one putting the light in the darkness, shining a light on where things need to be and challenging that both publicly and privately. And so for me, I think power was at one point in time that it was shared, and then it became male. It became who was the man who could get it and then be able to divvy it out. It wasn't shareable. Outside of here, what I learned about power is that I got to take it by any means, that things weren't given and that you had to work for it. And when you work for it, you could get it. But there were certain individuals and systems that kept you out of that power dynamic. And, you know, we learned that education was the way, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. But that also can expose you to different ways of how power corrupts eternally. And so I'm still unlearning and learning who gets it, who doesn't, and what happens when it's challenged.
Yeah, I think reading, I know you mean when you say education is the key.
Yeah.
I think reading in books, and I don't know if that what our forefathers meant when they said that,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't have to have an education
Correct.
and but have freedom.
Mhm.
But it comes through reading in books and learning your history, your true history. Yeah.
So, I grew up in a church that had a black woman pastor over the church. And to date, it is still the unsafest, unhealthiest place I've ever been a part of in my entire life. And to the point where people still in the church invite me and my siblings back to the church, and there's no way, probably because of spiritual trauma, that I would probably go back
And
in
never
the
go.
church.
Yeah.
Even though I talked to my mother about it, my sisters, and I'm like, yeah, we're not going. And that was, I guess, my introduction to power and what it looked like from a black woman. So fast forward to my next conceptualization of power looked like being on the campus of the University of Kentucky.
High five, baby.
I ain't no BBN. No. It looked like white men.
Facts.
It looked like power looked like white men's disregard for everybody but themselves, even white women, right? And that's what power looked like. It felt like when being on that campus and the things that they were able to get away with and how they were able to treat black people and black staff, and then graduating. And I've been a rebel this entire time. I was, ask my mother, I've never listened to authority. Somebody should have diagnosed me with oppositional defiant disorder, but that probably wouldn't have done no good for anybody. Right. Anyways, but then later looking at power and learning from my wife about power and power structures, and what power looks like and how to transfer power. I realized power is not a zero-sum game. Everybody has power, even if it's power over just a little bit, or over themselves, over a given situation. Everybody has it. I think the goal is that the more you accumulate, the more you should be disseminating. So if you are hoarding power for yourself, right? I think that's one of those churches that's unhealthy and spiritually unsafe for people, right? So the power that the people have, say if they're the head of the church, should be disseminated to the rest of the people in the church. So that's how I conceptualize power today. And more so, to your point, Emily, that knowledge is power, but being in street life and street culture, the things I learned there, I could not have learned in books.
Absolutely.
Right? Kilos being 2.2 pounds, I could not have learned that in a book. Not in that way, to apply it in that way. Yes, I could have went to a chemistry class and they would have talked about the metric system and I probably would have picked it up. But
Not that way.
in a different context, nothing that I learned there, right, could have been learned in a book. I could not have learned where socks on your fingertips as you load clips so that your fingerprints wasn't on the bullet. I couldn't learn it in a book. But in that space, that knowledge is power because somebody else who didn't have that knowledge is going down for murder because their fingerprints was on the bullet. Right? So I think knowledge is power in all facets of life. It can be applied very differently. But I think when we think of knowledge, my grandfather said to learn from your mistakes you're wise if you learn from your mistakes. You're a genius if you learn from the mistakes of others. So being able to conceptualize and operationalize somebody else's behavior and learn simply from that, right? So if I watched you walk up to the stove and touch and burn your hand, I didn't read that in a book, but I was able to observe what you did, and so I know, don't go touch that stove.
I always been a rebel in that way, because I'm probably the one to touch the stove still.
Same.
I learned through experience, but and
Absolutely.
because they distort who we are, and we not just slavery. That's only part of the story. And so I, with that, going back to the church a little bit, what did you learn about family by reading the Bible?
Mm.
In that, how to learn about how to handle conflict as well. So, biblically, what about that shaped how you saw family?
I think about Cain and Abel,
Mm.
how strife and jealousy and the family structure can destroy it. How unchecked attitudes and behaviors are destructive. And if you allow those to fester, it will destroy. So I think, keep it short, so because I know the Reverend's about to hit us with a dissertation.
Conflict, right? We don't talk about Bruno. We don't. I think what I learned in the church structure is that certain things we just don't talk about. We're going to talk about Bruno. We don't talk about the man on the piano with the husband with the fur coat on the front row. It's conflictive, right? But we don't talk about it. So it's in front of our face, but we don't talk about it. It's in the Bible, it's in the book. We talk about conflict all the time. It's everywhere in the text. You can see how, the kingdom takes the violent and take the violent by force, take the kingdom back by force. Like it's there, right? I think I learned about conflict, or what the church taught me about conflict, that conflict is inevitable and there are consequences to conflict. Conflict gets you sat down. Conflict gets you kicked out of church. Conflict removes your title. Conflict takes you away from your ministry. It strips you of your ministry, right? If you are not following what they've told you to follow. Conflict in church sense has not been positive. It's been restrictive, been hurtful, been harmful, been violent. And that conflict turned into spiritual violence, spiritual trauma, because we didn't talk about why it was traumatic. We didn't talk about why it was wrong. We didn't talk about, or even take me to the scripture to even talk about, right, what I should have done, or what we should have done, or what they should have done, whatever the case may be. Been violent. And so I'm still unlearning to this day about how conflictive and how violent those things were in my embedded theology. I'm still unlearning those conflictive things. Constantly unlearning. And it comes in different forms. It comes in where I am in my ministerial walk. It came in conflict and showing me even through a current process I just went through last year of looking at what conflict, how can it look? Conflict doesn't always have to be negative. It can be restorative. You learn a lot about yourself and a lot about people in conflict.
I'm a person, I like conflict because I feel like conflict can be positive.
You correct?
It drives innovation, it shifts things, it calls you to be creative, but it's about your perception of it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are fearful of conflict and avoid it, and that's why they stay stuck.
Correct.
But only if we're willing to talk about it. Because I think about clients that come to sessions that don't have nothing going on. And so you sitting across from them, and they sitting across from you, and you're just like,
Sight.
I guess this is what we're doing the next 5 minutes, because I can be somewhere else doing something else. All right, because if you don't want to come to me and talk about what we're going to talk about, then we can reschedule. And, we can do this tomorrow even. Right, but then when people come into session with all types of stuff, right, I love it. Because it gives us something to work with, right? Even in the professional setting, when teams had issues going on or we was going through things, it gave us somewhere to start from, right? And somewhere to go. And I always enjoyed it. People in my previous employment thought I was weird or crazy because I loved when we was experiencing a whole lot of conflict. Because I'm like, okay, this is areas of development for all of us and how to better handle that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's difficult because a lot of people, they not in their space, and if they don't have trust, it's hard to come and lay everything to a stranger you don't know when you can't even self-success and do all that than to understand how words can bring freedom.
Because they've seen the consequences of that.
Yeah.
They've seen the consequences of what happened when they do. And so I'd rather keep my mouth shut than deal with getting ostracized, not having the family, not talking to whoever. I just keep it to myself because I've seen the consequences in the pulpit, on the street corner, in my house. Like, I've seen it. I don't want that. So I just be quiet.
And when your discernment isn't spiritually connected, those experiences can destroy your ability
Absolutely.
to discern.
Absolutely.
Because you don't trust yourself anymore, right? When you should be trusting God anyways. But you now don't trust yourself to be able to open up because you feel like you've had the experience in which you thought someone was safe and then they proved to not be safe, and then you think the world is unsafe.
Because they were the representation of God to you.
Yeah, like I said, we can talk about that all day. I got two more questions. We may have to do a part two. But for this question, in black families, we talk about parentified, how daughters and sons, girls are expected to nurture, to hold the family together emotionally. The men are taught to man up, do not show any emotion. How did these gendered expectations shape your adulthood, your relationship, and your sense of self? You kind of already talked about it.
That's a loaded question.
It is.
That's a part 3. We can spend a whole hour just talking about that.
True.
Because I've spent my entire life wanting to do away with the identity I've inherited or that I was given,
Environmentalize into.
right? So I didn't want to be a man. I thought we could all just be this egalitarian humans in this utopia, and it don't work like that. God didn't even set it up that way, right? So on my journey, as I write my second book, that is titled For Black Boys Who Frolic in a Field of Daisies, and it's titled that because this inherited idea of gendered expectations is harmful. But what I found in doing work and taking services to the black community, we don't know it's a burning building to leave it, right? We have to convince people that they're in a burning building to get them to run out of it. But when it comes to gendered expectations, for myself, I don't adhere to a lot of them. I'm like the primary cook of the family. I'm soft, I paint, I'm the poet, right? And that's just who I've become over time. Even though some of the traits of being a man or masculinity, I've learned to adopt because it's necessary to have them. I wanted to do away with them because I thought the entire spectrum of masculinity was toxic, and it's not. It's just the very narrow, Eurocentric, white, male, Christian version of masculinity is what's toxic. And I've had to learn what it looks like to be a man and not be any of those things. And then be in what I'll call group therapy discussions with other men. And my wife used to tell me or ask me, why do you waste your time on them? And I always would tell her, if I didn't, no one would. And if I didn't talk to them, it would look like them victimizing the rest of our community. Not just black women, but other black men are subjected to the violence of masculinity when done and portrayed in that way. So I'll always down the hill of having these tough conversations with black men about black male masculinity, because if I don't, I fear that no one else will. And if they picked up the knowledge, had a friend of mine stop calling black women females because it bothered me, because we only refer to a litter of dogs as female or male. You don't say, oh, that's my male friend Javon. You just don't. And he's also a minister. And so we had to walk that and unpack it over and over, the way his language at 30 plus years old had been constructed, that you don't call me male. You know, that's my male friend. Or that's a male over there, right? But what you will refer to that pit bull litter as a male, as a female. So why do you keep referring to women as female, but not me as a male? So you're objectifying them and dehumanizing them from the basis of your language, Pastor. And he didn't like to hear that gospel, but he eventually came to the other side because he heard how he spoke to his children. And it became real for him.
Yeah, I don't.
Plug, Perfect Peace by Daniel Black. It's a good book that goes to that.
What he said.
What he said.
I would just give a caveat. If you haven't read the book, It Didn't Start With You by Mark Gwynn. It really unpacks the generational traumas that we tend to lean into from a different perspective and how it affects us. And so when you are an adult and you have anxiety, but we don't talk about how you sat at the front porch day after day, Sunday after Sunday, Friday after Friday, waiting for Daddy to pull up, and he never did. When we look at how social anxiety sets up when you were embarrassed in front of the family, when something happened and your mama told everybody in front of everybody during the family dinner, and you got social anxiety at 25. We don't talk about how those things in our childhood manifest into our adulthood, and it shapes our sense of self, right? Yes, you had a father, but he wasn't in the house, and now you're looking for men or women or he, she, they, or them, whoever you are, who give you temporary love because you're so used to your father not being there. So you are leaning into those individuals who are not emotionally available, who are not mentally available, who are not psychologically available, because you're repeating the same pattern of the father or the male figure that was in your house or the mother figure who was in your house. And then you come to us to unpack your PTSD, your general anxiety disorder, your social anxiety disorder, right? And those how those things are manifest. So when we don't talk about how those childhood experiences stay with us into adulthood and how it shapes us, that's how it shapes the sense of self. That's how it shapes relationships. That's how it shapes those gender identities, because we are not aware enough of how those childhood traumas manifest itself and shape us as adults. They don't leave us. We wear them on our sleeves. They're in our pulpits. They're in the therapist here. Our childhood traumas didn't leave us. We just learned about them. We just learned about them. That's it. My childhood trauma hasn't left me. I just worked through it, right? So, yes, there's still a little Tracy here, still a little Emily here, still a little Javon here. You're still working through those things, even in that space where we're helping other folks work through it. That still shapes our sense of self, too.
And this is the last question. So this last question, it talks about in family or in community, we often taught to forgive quickly to keep the family together. Now with that, this is a caveat a little bit, because I do feel like you said, to keep the family together, we are taught about forgiveness. But when I look at, and I talked a little about this last month, but when I looked at Abraham, the father of faith, we love to talk about how he was willing to sacrifice Isaac, but we don't talk about enough that he wasn't willing to sacrifice himself, because his wife, he called his sister to save his life, but he was willing to give up his son. So we willing for us to forgive when it benefit us, but we never care about the sacrifice of someone else. I say that to say, with grace and accountability, because I think we have to learn that as a culture. I said I was going to build it all up in one thing, and I'm doing it. About our R. Kellys, about our Bill Cosby's, and not saying I agree with sexual assault or any of that, but even with God, with Abraham, it was some things was given grace, and it was some things he was held accountable for. So I feel us as a culture, we have difficulty knowing when to give accountability and when to operate in grace. How do we bring people back to the fold who wronged us? Because sometimes we kick people, ostracize people, but never bring them back in and never bring back community. How do we work through that? How do we figure out when to give grace and accountability when harm is present? Loaded question.
It
Sorry
is.
to do that to y'all. But y'all my thought partner, so I decided to put it on the table.
You want to fumble to this?
Yeah.
I think first question is, who is forgiveness for?
Ourselves, first and foremost. Right. So I look at the question itself and I approach it in reverse. So we got to acknowledge harm. If you can see the question and read the question, you acknowledge harm to hold people accountable with grace to balance what it looks like to be together as a family and community. Right? But I think it starts with the acknowledgement part, where we've had so many people, not as extreme as the R. Kelly situation, but actually as extreme because we got uncles that we know, aunties that we know, cousins, family, friends that we know, right, that still have access to the family.
Absolutely.
And the amenities of what it means to be a family without ever acknowledging the harm that said person did to the family, right? So a couple of things I've heard today was communication. So that looks like, for me, acknowledging the harm, right? And if we put a period there, acknowledge the harm, and see how the people react to the acknowledged harm, because that is the discernment of where I should go next. Because just because we acknowledge the harm and I can forgive you, I don't have to balance what it looks like to be together as a family with you. And you might not have access to my community. Because if you don't acknowledge the harm or even take this conversation well enough for me to feel safe with you and expose my family and kids to you, then I won't be. So we don't have to actually be in the feng shuis, family barbecues, nor does the people who accept that behavior have to be around, right? And that is a very lonely and isolating experience to say, I'm not doing this. It is. But I think we acknowledge the harm and put the period and let's see what the conversation looks like. And then we can go from there, right? Because then we can talk about accountability, right? Because I have a poem that says, I tried my best is a gaslit sign that hangs above our mothers. And from so many of my peers, that is the truest of statements. Our mothers would love to say, I tried my best, as if their best didn't lead to me being harmed. Right? And this isn't the first time my mother, who's here, has heard this. There's a poem in my book, so she's read it, heard it, seen it, had the conversation, right? But I try my best as a gaslit sign that hangs above our mothers. And we can acknowledge harm, period. Now what does that conversation look like after we acknowledge the harm? Because if it looks like I tried my best, then we can continue to revisit that conversation, the first part, because your best hurt me. And then we can get to the accountability part, right? And that's just with a parent. That's not with people who might mean less or is less tied to you, but acknowledge harm for me is where it starts.
Are we also talking to the survivor of said harm? Because that is the author and the finisher of what acknowledgement looks like.
Yeah.
So if we as a community step in to address or acknowledge the harm without talking to the person who was harmed, they are the author and the finisher of what the acknowledgement looks like. So it may not be you stepping in for me. It may be you open the space for me to talk, and that allows us to have the conversation about acknowledging the harm. Yes, we want to protect, right? But if we don't talk to the survivor who's been through it, like how you harmed me, I'm the author and finisher of that. I get to share that experience for myself. You don't get to share my story. You don't get to tell my narrative. You don't get to tell me what I felt like. You don't get to tell me what that harm felt like for me. I felt that in my body, in my brain, in my spirit. So no, you don't get to say to me that I tried my best. Have you asked me if the best was good for me? Have you asked me what it felt like in this smaller body, in this smaller version of self, how it still affects me? Have we talked about that? Then we can have some other conversations. Because when we don't talk to the person who is not the victim, the survivor of that, then their voice is already silenced. There is no acknowledgement without the person who did the harm. or who is the receiver of the harm, then we don't have the full story. So yeah, we got to sit and be like, hold on, wait a minute. What acknowledgement? What does acknowledgement like for you? Do you need a conversation? Do you need to just not to talk to them? Do you need them to block their phone? Like, what do you need? That is because again, we will put the need in someone's mouth, but that might not be the language of the words they need. So we got to lean into them. So if it was for you to write the poem, then go ahead, baby. Absolutely, that's what you needed, and I'm glad that worked for you, right? But we got to be able to sit in the space to ask the folks who endured it what they need versus stepping in to make it right for them. That silences them.
I totally agree with both. As we wrap this up, this topic is so important because the family and the church is two things that I feel like was healing for our communities. But these are the two things that people are running away from. And sometimes you go too far left and you go too far right. And I'm afraid that we're losing our history.
Mm.
But again, what do that look like? What do that healing look like? That may look different for others. I think is there any questions out there online? Anyone see it? I want to open that in case it was. Okay. So I want to thank you both for joining us today. Powerful conversation. I do think we're going to need a part 2, part 3.
Yeah, we got to unpack some stuff.
We got a lot of stuff to unpack here. But before we go, can you tell people how to contact you all? You know, who you are, your contact information. These are great minds. So I want you all to be able to reach them if you need to.
You can email me at javonbrown@gmail.com. That is JAVOUGHNBROWN@gmail.com. Or you can shoot me a text, which I did not put this for the online version, but please write down the phone number, 502-297-3480. You can send me a text with your name and the subject of why you're reaching out.
You can reach me. I'm in private practice at Life Journeys Louisville. So Tracy Simmons at lifejourneysky.com. And that's on the screen. So Tracy Simmons at lifejourneyky.com.
Thank you both. It's going to be on the screen. It'll be on YouTube. Y'all need to pause it and go back to it when it's on YouTube. We do have one question from the crowd.
Amen. Praise the Lord, everybody. Listen, I know this isn't remarks. This really is a question. But before we jump into, I guess, kind of final remarks, can we first just celebrate Reverend Tracy and Brother Javon for just coming and just sharing just their expertise and their gift with us? I have a question. And maybe this is something that you all can speak to from your own experience. I may be speaking a bit out of turn here, but I've got an itching suspicion that you guys are setting the precedent in your own family and in your own bloodline for what healing and transformation looks like. And so my question for you all is, going back particularly to Javon's comment about riding in the car with his grandma, I think us as Black people, we have gotten all too familiar with those conversations when we've had maybe with our ancestors or those that have gone before us that shut down our inquiries. And Reverend Tracy, you touched on this primarily because they really don't have an answer. But my question for you both is, how do you navigate moving individuals in your family to a space of accountability, to a space of forgiveness, to a space of just recollection as a family when everyone in the family don't have the tools? At the end of the day, y'all the two folks in your family that may be the most educated. Y'all the only folks in the family that may be this degree, that may be this credential. How do you move the alcoholic father that don't have the degree that you have? How do you move the mother that had a bunch of kids and spent most of her life working 12, 15 hours just to keep food on the table, where now Javon is free, now Tracy is free? How do we get the rest of the family free when everybody just ain't where we at?
I hope I answered this right. My wife is in the crowd. I would say first with humility. That has been my problem as a young man, as a husband, as a father. Humility. I would say for me it starts there. And I did not start the journey with understanding humility, so I bumped my head to know that humility is first important. Also, when you leave and go get education and come back, the people see you in a different light.
True.
So they see you as somebody who lacks humility. Unfortunately, as if you know it all, or you got this information, or as if what you're speaking of is above a level of consciousness that they can understand. As if you're talking at a level or about a thing that's not achievable because they see me go do great achievements and feats and they aren't quite cut from that cloth, right? So I would say humility and grace, and know when to stop pouring into a cup that has holes at the bottom. Because at some point you have to preserve yourself, even though the alcoholic uncle don't want to stop drinking. Cirrhosis of the liver and all, yellow eyes, bloodshot,
Jaundice.
right?
Gout.
Wakes up gasping for air, can't breathe, right? Despite them not wanting to change and you wanting them to, or wanting them to come towards a different bill of health or a different type of life, you gotta learn when to stop pouring. Because you might believe you can and that you have the capacity to, but for me and mine, my capacity and what I have is for my wife and the members of my household. So I can pour into you, we can have a conversation, you can lean on me, but if I am seeing that this cup, this metaphorical cup, has holes, crater-sized holes at the bottom, we have to first work on patching those. And that's work that I don't want to do as a family member. That's work you would have to go do with a therapist, right? Or with a substance abuse counselor, right? And even nudging them towards that direction, right? We understand in the counseling world, people don't receive help until they're ready.
True.
Even when you present it to them, we can sit across from each other all day, but I call them hostage clients. Right? They hostage clients. I'm working with boys right now who are a group in gang violence involved. They are hostage clients to me. They don't want to be there. They don't think drinking lean and popping Percocets is a problem. They don't think toting guns at 16, 17, 18 is a problem. Right? They're hostage clients. So they're not even going to take my assessment seriously. They're going to lie. Right? They're going to lie. But humility won because they don't understand where I'm coming from. Right? They definitely don't. They think they got a perception of me that I'm this, oh, Mr. Javon degree. No, I bump my head too. Let's start there.
Facts.
And then the second part with grace, I understand that your lived experience that led you down a certain type of path, right? For our uncles that had conflict that they never talked about because they was probably molested, right? At 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They started drinking at 10, and they've been drinking for 50 years, right? We got to think about that. So they trying to heal something that happened to them 45, 55 years ago. The craters at the bottom, we got a patch that I'm not going to do. Because I've tried that with my family, and it was not a position I should have ever put myself in. But as a young clinician, I did not know no better.
Yeah.
I saw a problem and wanted to help.
Yep.
But I saw what I thought was a problem. Again, they don't think it's a burning building. They think the temperature's supposed to be
That's the
hot.
key. That's the key.
And because I went and got the education and saw something different, I understand it shouldn't be 125 degrees in here. It's actually very hot in here. But because I now am in cooler climates, I am trying to get them to come, and they're like, whoa, it's cold out there. What you're expressing is a cold, and I'm used to this heat. So for me, it's humility, grace, and patience, and then the last one is understanding when to stop pouring, because they just might not want to do better, or like in the substance abuse world, until they have real world consequences that push
Absolutely.
them that way, DUIs, dead loved ones, CPS taking children, and the whole nine, they're not gonna stop. Or God. And God's over all of it. But if they find God without the extreme consequences, wonderful. But oftentimes what I have found is the extreme consequences has to happen for them to even
Make
want to stop. And hopefully the extreme consequences don't lead them to want to drink more, because that's the other side.
We talk about stages of change, right? What stage of change are they in?
Yeah.
Mm.
I have a question, and it's just, have you heard the term family tax, and how do you overcome that? Saying that you became successful, but now your family thinks that you owe them, and that conversation, advice on getting that.
Absolutely. I have a cousin in the NBA right now. I would name him, but you can take my last name, and he's top 5 in the NBA right now. Who we struggle with this family tax situation, and I think it's a character thing, right? At the end of the day, because he's a multi-millionaire, but how I lead a group of people isn't just that, because it's not always financially, mentally, physically, emotionally, but what does it look like to lead a group of people and to be in community with a group of people? So for me and mine, what it looks like is I bring information back to the village. I'm not sure what else I would owe them until I'm rich, which God, that's the Lord, it's on His way, right? But until then, what resources and knowledge do I have to impart on them, and do I do it? So for me, the tax of bringing back information hasn't even been well received for it to be even a tax. So I would then ask a question as I'm thinking out loud now, is what does tax look like for money? It looks like money?
I gave birth to you, now you owe me. I'm just using an example. I gave birth to you, I didn't have to do that. Me and your father put you through school, now you give us that.
So you're speaking of obligation.
That, or I've used the term family tax, but
Yeah, so you're speaking of obligation of what is, do we lean into, do we agree with an obligation that we now are somewhere else that we now have to give back, right? And so it's based on, the culture of community, right? We were raised in a culture of community. Like there are people around us that poured into us. How do we pour back into, right? And the obligation of having the same blood, same DNA, there should be some level of obligation to that. Yes and no, depends on how you approach it, right? It doesn't always have to be financial, because there is an obligation, at least from my point of view, of doing something different that my parents and my siblings didn't do. So that's my tax that I'm choosing to pay, right? My tax for me is that, yes, I have this knowledge now, and now it's now my obligation to give it back. So I treat my nieces differently. I approach my nephews differently. I live differently, because what was given to me, I have to give back. That's my tax I'm willing to pay.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So I'm taking that thought process of not being something negative, but I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to pay that tax. I'm willing to say, yes, I know this knowledge, and I'm willing to give it back. But you're not gonna push me to do something. I ain't no killer, but don't push me. But I ain't gonna push me to do something I don't want to do. I pour into because I want to, not that I have to. I get to pour.
Yeah.
I get to pour back into people. I get to pour into my nieces and nephews. I get to pour into my friends. I get to pour into my sorority sisters. I get to do all those things. That is a privilege I get to do. I don't have to do any of that. I choose to. And that tax I'm willing to pay because I'm choosing versus being obligated to, which is what the other part of that side I think we're talking about too. There are choices, and I get to use them happily.
I think it goes back to the honored.
Yeah.
What you said about honoring thy mother and father, or uncle and auntie and cousin. I think about how one was honored. Right, so you will have, we could say a mother, we would say a father, who was dishonorable, but now the glory is great, is good. They now I gave birth to you, but they've dishonored you up until
To that point.
Up until
Yeah,
that point.
yeah.
So honoring you almost is in mirror of how you honored me, right? But if it is for, we'll say an auntie who showed up, gave her last, taught you, took you to church, poured into you, did everything that they could to honor you, and then you get to where you're going and be like, I don't owe you nothing. You did that because we was family. Like what? Like what do I owe you? I think then it's a different conversation on how you honor the people that honored you, because it's different, right? It's the equity part of life. I also agree with the good reverend here about pouring into like the next generation, because the one that came before you probably will keep making poor decisions. Like if I got rich today, I know there's family members who I would not give $1 million to. Just wouldn't. One, because I'd be frustrated that it'd be gone so quickly.
Lack of stewardship,
Right.
financial
It'd be
stewardship.
gone so quickly. They didn't multiply not a penny of it. They just spent it. But then there's the next generation you invest in through knowledge and information, and care and safety, to where you do put the $1 million in a trust.
Yeah.
And so when they're of age to inherit that at 21, 25, they make different and better decisions, right? So that's how I would approach the black tax, as Oprah called it, which I don't like her approach at all, actually.
Don't like her. Ooh,
Yeah.
I said it out loud. I'm sorry.
And that's okay. Yeah, her approach, because it is disconnecting, right, to community, one's approach to community. When I went to Egypt, I learned two things are most important in life: God and family. Period. Right? God and then family. Because I saw how those people worshiped together, their businesses were together, they lived together, they ate together, everything was together. You walk into a restaurant, every level, it'd be a 2-year-old boy serving you water. They don't have no ice in it, by the way, because they don't have ice over there, but it's cold water. They're serving you cold water out of a water bottle in your cup, right? At every single level. So I think about connecting this to community and just honoring those who honored you, is what the tax looks like. If you have an uncle or auntie that's never been present, or a cousin that's never been present, you probably owe them nothing.
Like y'all need to come back next month for stewardship, but
Was that the invitation?
Right.
I think, wow, just good dialogue, good conversation, which I knew it would be. We could talk about that later. But I do appreciate these two for taking their time on this good old Sunday afternoon to join with us, and those who are watching online, those who are in the sanctuary. Thank you all. We do not take it for granted. And join us next week. I will pray us out. I got to do a little benediction. You know, it's the church. So let us pray and we can exit out. All right. Father God, we just want to tell you again, thank you. God, thank you for the words that were spoken, the light that was given. God, thank you for the wisdom that was spoken and the understanding that shall come. God, right now we ask right now to pray for every family. God, that you will give us discernment in who and how to honor those in our community. God, right now, every chain, every generational curse, but we not speaking on those things, but we shall walk in generational blessing, that no more that the trauma shall be passed to the next generation, but the healing shall come. And God, that you have called us to be disruptors, you have called us to be chain breakers,
Yeah,
and we
yeah.
will walk in that calling, and we will walk in that purpose. God, right now we ask that everyone who's listening, who shall listen, God, that freedom shall reign. And this is what we will pray in your love.